So while Nigeria is battling insecurity across states and region, we're also trying to get out of a recession. Call it battle against recession, if you may, because it is said that these issues, security and the economy, are tied together. So if the economy does well, it is said that you'll see security also doing well, not just in terms of funding for the security agencies, but in terms of the reality of people. People have access to more funds and, well, it is said that they might not turn into vices. But that's a conversation for another day. This morning, we're taking a look at Nigeria's recession reality. How soon are we getting out of it, especially in the light of the World Bank's NDU, which was released recently. And to discuss these issues, we have joining us Professor Magnus Kpakol, who is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center, a former Chief Economic Advisor to President and CEO, National Planning Commission, and former Professor of Economics at University of Dallas in Texas, United States. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily. Well, let me begin with the obvious disparity. So on one hand, you have Nigerian government saying we're getting out of recession as soon as possible, in fact, by the first quarter of next year. But when you take a look at this latest report by the World Bank saying that even for 2021, growth is uncertain, how do we marry these two projections?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me on your wonderful show. Well, I mean, the World Bank has to say what it has to say. I mean, they cover the whole world and they compare countries, and obviously have an office here in Abuja, and they look at the economy as critically as anyone. And of course, the Nigerian government collects original data and looks at its own data. So typically, I go with what the Nigerian government says, because that's where we get the original data. But even so, we have to pay some attention to what others are saying that are looking at us. But the way I see it, though, I think that it is a difficult time. I think that we're in some serious difficulty, which we have been in for about 6 years now. You have a situation where over the last 6 years, we've managed to grow just about 0%. Take it probably about 0.3, 0.4% over the last 6 years. And that's a pretty serious situation, considering that our growth rate in the population is near 3%. So that's really serious misery growth, as people would describe it. So what that means is one thing, that we are not producing goods and services that the people want. So we need to be able to look for how we can produce the goods and services that the people of the world want, especially the people of Nigeria. We want to be able to replace the goods that we're importing as much as we can. We still have to be part of the global trading system and trade with the rest of the world, but we've got to be able to produce some things ourselves. And we're not doing that well. So I think that that's where the problem is. Even if you look at security that you guys just covered, I believe that the primary reason we have the security problems we have in the country is that we are not producing as well as we should produce. And what that means is that we are not working well with the factors of production. So we need to find a way that we have very good capital formation, capital accumulation taking place. We have to manage our natural resources well. And most importantly, we want to be sure that we are investing in our people. The human capital development is in grave danger in Nigeria. We are extremely delinquent in that area. And so we have to pay very good attention to the investments we put into our people. If you look at the government, when I talked about the factors of production, I talked about natural resources, capital, and of course human resources. But if you look at the role of the government, I think that the government has to be a little bit more purposeful in doing research, in doing development, to try to be sure that the things are going well, that should go well. If you go to most ministries in the government, whether it be at the federal or state level, what you find is that there's very little happening in the departments called planning, research, and statistics. In fact, when I was in government, I noticed that people got pretty upset if they were posted to a planning and research or development department, because that typically was a neglected department, which of course I did not do that when I was there. I think that that's an area we need to pay attention to. We have to do more research and development in the country to try to find out what the problem is holistically. And I think that we have to find a way also to involve all tiers of government. Quite often we dump everything at the foot of the federal government, at the foot of even the president. And when things fail, some people even call for the resignation of the president, which is really, I guess, surprised people say that. I mean, the president wouldn't resign because the economy is doing poorly. I mean, he takes final responsibility, but that's not what the problem is. The problem is not so much with the army chiefs or with the president. The problem is with the stock, with the population. Now, of course, they lead, and they have to take leadership and make sure that they are engaging the people as a whole. They have
Prof,
to make sure that there is serious collaboration between the federal, the state, and local. I don't think that that's happening as well as it should happen.
You know, I may have been wrong when I said that we're not having that conversation about security and economy today. Clearly, you are already getting into that. But, you know, still taking a look at that report, that Nigeria Development Update that was put out by the World Bank, says that in the next 3 years, an average Nigerian could see a reversal of decades of economic growth, and the country could enter its deepest recession since the 1980s. Now, that's a very grim prediction, but something that also hit me is the fact that, you know, the World Bank country director said that Nigeria can choose to break decisively from business as usual and rise to its considerable potential by sustaining bold reforms. Now, the term that was quite confusing for me was business as usual. And for you, if you could just help us understand what constitutes business as usual, because we're looking at a point where we have millions entering into poverty if we don't stop that business as usual. So what's business as usual for you?
First of all, I agree with the World Bank that we are in very difficult times. And I agree that we have lost quite a bit in terms of personal and disposable income, that is household income. I agree with them there. There's no argument whatsoever. And to me, business as usual just means doing the same kinds of things that we have been doing that have caused us to produce the paltry results in output, as we have seen. That's what business as usual is. And I think that very important in that is the neglect I see of the investments in the people. I think that we don't do much human capital development. If you look at our schools are in very bad shape. We go to the elementary schools and secondary schools, especially the public schools. They don't look like what they should look like. And that's an area we need to pay much attention to right away. We look at even with the ASU strike, I mean, students are rarely in school. So it seems to me we've got to pay more attention to these kinds of things. And then we have to provide also the infrastructure that you need, especially like electricity, of course. I think that we can take bolder steps to try to provide electricity better than we are doing now. I think that there are some methods that can be used to accelerate the provision of electricity to the people. I think we could also make internet provision stronger than we have now. Let me just say a couple of things very quickly. I think that, as I tried to say earlier, that we need to find a way to export more. And this should be a local government issue. Every local government should look for something that they can export. I think we can do it. It's extremely critical. A country is not supposed to be, I'm going to use a kind of a funny term here, we can't run a sort of a Milky Way economy where everything has been liquefied. a certain lumpiness is required. What I mean by that is we need to be able to find grains throughout the economy. That is, we need to have lumps, places where we identify that this local government can produce cashew nut. The other local government can produce fish. The other local government can also produce fish. This other one can produce such and such, and they are exporting them. If you look at our exports per capita, it is not anything to write home about. The exports of Germany per capita versus Nigeria is like 70 times. It's like 70 times what we export is what I'm trying to say. Whereas if you look at our per capita GDP, it is not quite as bad. Maybe 20 times, their per capita GDP is about 20 times ours. But their exports is like 70 times ours. So that tells me something is happening here. We are not exporting well at all. I mean, of course, as everybody knows, we are mostly just exporting crude oil. And I think that we can be exporting a lot more than that. I used to argue that we should produce. Now, then you ask a question, where are the areas where we can export? Well, the number one area is obviously agriculture. But I always argued that we should process our agricultural products and export them. The other area is the area of technology, soft technology. Most of our guys are very good these days at programming, at computer coding and stuff like that. So I think we should give them the empowerment, the enablement to be able to faster internet speed, to be able to communicate with people outside and do a good job exporting those kinds of services.
Yeah.
But in agriculture, we can just simply export what we have. Okay. I mean, just export a lot, produce more, and export them. And then as time goes on, you process them. But we are in dire straits right
just
now.
one moment before we veer off that conversation. That you started something earlier, Prof, and I'd like you to step up on it. I mean, you've worked, at the federal level, being an advisor to the president. You've even coordinated the National Poverty Eradication Program before. And so when you talk about over-centralizing of these issues at the federal level and not dissipating them or expecting as much from the state governments, well, it's something a number of people have also raised as a concern. How significant is the role of the states, or how much can the states do themselves, given what some of them say is the limitation that the Constitution has placed on them to access some of the things that they have? Do you think they have what it takes now, I mean the states now, the subnationals, to help develop this infrastructure that you're talking about, to help bolster or at least start off the production process that we can scale up on over time to help us get out of this recession that the World Bank is suspecting?
Absolutely. I think that there are some things that can be done. I think we need to pay more attention to microfinancing, for example. When I was in government, I tried to set up what I call a multi-partner matching funds scheme, in which a state government puts out some amount of money and the federal government matches it in the support of small-scale businesses. The small-scale businesses, micro, small, and medium enterprises cannot succeed without access to capital. I mean, they face three principal challenges. One, most importantly, is a lack of access to capital. They've got to have that, otherwise nothing happens. Then they also have to have access to markets. And I think that in these two critical areas, the government must be involved in looking for markets for them, even outside of the country, and in looking for access to capital for them. That has to be provided, because it's not that easy for little guys in our communities to have access to that. The other area is access to information. They need information to be successful. I gotta tell you, literacy rates are very high in Nigeria. So, I mean, illiteracy rates are high. You have to go to places like, matter of fact, I talked about this some time back, in the north, the rate of illiteracy is extremely high. There is no way that you can be globally competitive if you cannot read and write and do business in a major in a global language, such as English. It is just impossible to do so. So we have to find a way that we intensify our adult literacy programs, our school literacy programs, make sure that our people are reading and writing and being competitive. The reason you see Nigeria lagging behind the way it is lagging now in terms of the economy, and we can say so, we don't need to wait for the World Bank to tell us this because we can see the numbers ourselves. The reason is just because we are not competitive. We are not globally competitive. By that, what I mean is that we are not able to produce goods and services at least cost. And we are not able to produce these goods and services in large quantities, and we are not able to produce them at a high rate of productivity. So if we're able to do these things,
Prof,
then we can compete and people will buy our goods and services.
Yes, just one moment, Prof. A good number of people have said...
suffering now. Yeah, the reason we have the poor...
Yeah, just a moment, Prof.
You're saying something.
Yeah. A good number of people have said the same thing, that we need to scale up on production and productivity. That is taken. But perhaps the challenge then would be the process. You know, just as I said, and I'd like to emphasize again, there is the need for that collaboration or conversations between the federal government and the state governments to ensure that the needful is done to scale up production and productivity. How, perhaps, is the challenge here now? Is it a problem of policy, a problem of collaboration? Just what is the issue? What's the reason why we are unable to even produce at all, or much less scale up our capacity to produce, you know, just as you are suggesting, as a number of other people have?
Well, I think it's political will on the part of the federal government and the state governments. The state governments can initiate it. The federal can also initiate it. When I was in government, I tried to initiate it, as I said, through the multi-partner matching fund scheme. So what I think should happen is that every state should look to production as critical, as probably the most important thing, because you need human beings to do that. For you to produce, you need your people, your households to be involved. That means you got to invest in them. You got to pull them together and say, what is it that you need so that you can produce more yam, so that you can produce more cassava, so that you can produce more snails, so that you can produce whatever it is that you need to produce. There are states, for example, in Nigeria that I believe can do more meat packing. If at all we do it, we can export meat all over Africa. We are buying meat today from South Africa. If you go to ShopRite, you will see it packed from South Africa. I think that we can produce meat that will feed our people and sell in our stores and even export out. In fact, I can also tell you that through collaboration, even southern states can partner with northern states. I mean, River State, for example, they can partner with Katsina State and get the meat from Katsina and process and pack it. They can work it together. I expect to see a lot more collaboration amongst the states than I do see today. Across board, northern and southern states should get together. You should not be bounded by geographical constraints. I think they can get over that. So you use the word collaboration, and that's a very extremely important word in today's global economy. We're looking at the so-called fourth industrial revolution that involves much automation on top of digitization and artificial intelligence and all those kind of things. So that means that other countries are going to start to produce things at a very high rate of speed. And we will not be able to compete with them if we do not start now. So first to start, we need to have collaboration first inside of the country. Then we also will need collaboration outside of the country. So if we cannot produce the big machines, we can produce the software. Our guys are very creative, very ingenious. I've been talking to a lot of young guys that are very, very sharp. Even our little kids are doing wonderful things coding. I see them coding programs, developing apps and all of that. We need to help these guys to build markets. There is a way of engaging, first of all, even our folks in the diaspora that are sending billions of dollars home to us. We can engage them directly, and they will help link us with their host communities. So we have markets for these guys to do outsourcing. So our young guys that can do computer coding and programming and things in that manner can get markets outside. But it takes a lot of collaboration. I'm not saying that the president needs to be involved in this. You can do this at the local government level.
Okay.
Something I have been advocating for a long time, people are not paying much attention to, is that we need to have our local governments made into corporations. So let's say that you have Gokana, for example. You can have a Gokana corporation, development corporation. So you have a Gokana Development Corporation. You still have your chairman, who is the political head, but you will have a manager. The manager of Gokana Development Corporation could come from Gokana, or could come from Katsina, could come from Yobe, could come from Ghana, could come from China. That's a different entity. That manager is about producing goods and services in Gokana. You can do that across board, but I am surprised that we're not doing that.
Well, there's an example of such a thing, you know, once before. Many will remember the famous Lake Rice, which was a collaboration between Lagos State and Kebbi State for the production and processing of rice, or, you know, packaging and all of that. That has happened. But then
that is a good example, yes.
Yeah, the reference you have also made also goes, some might also want to reference as far back as the First Republic, where the regions were pretty much, you know, in competition with each other, and underscore the fact that they were more into agriculture. Where you stand, from your experience, from information available to you, what is it that could be hindering our exploits in agriculture to be scaled up as much as it is capable of being scaled up?
I think that I talked about it earlier, is human capital development. Is that our people need to have the skills. You know, we don't need to look for how we raise the contribution of agriculture to GDP. In the last quarter, we saw agriculture constituted about 30% of GDP. That's not so much a good thing. What that certainly just meant is that other areas declined significantly. So we need to, the kind of growth we're seeing in ICT is what we need to see in manufacturing. As you see, nothing is happening in manufacturing. But I think the reason I mention all these other areas is that for you to grow agriculture, then you got to have conduits. You've got to have channeling of the products out. They have to create a value chain so that when people produce these goods and services, they don't rot. They don't command very low prices because there are people that are picking them up from them. That's why I commend the central bank on their anchor borrowers program, because there they've set up an anchor. This is something I used to also talk about greatly when I was in government, to be sure that you had an anchor activity, an anchor company that takes the products of the smaller companies out and then, if possible, exports them. So when I'm talking about agriculture here, I'm looking at a situation where over time, the share of agriculture in GDP will be small, but still large in number. You know, you can have a statistically small fraction, but you can have a substantively large output amount. If you look at the advanced economies, that's what happens. Countries like the United States, they produce large amounts of agriculture, but the share of agriculture in GDP is around 1 to 2%. So we need to see that, and that's because a lot of the things are being processed. They bring them out and they're processing. And the processing arm of it, the processing side of it, is expanding. The technology involved is expanding.
Well, we're due for a break now.
Expanding. So those are the kind of things we got to be looking at.
Right. Prof, we're due for a break. Speaking of things we have to be looking at, that will form a major part of our conversation when we return from this break, because the World Bank, of course, has given some recommendations, really, to help us navigate through this very dire projection. So please stay with us.
Let me assure all Nigerians that monetary and fiscal authorities are alive to their responsibilities to restore the Nigerian economy back to recovery. But at this point, I also see this opportunity to appeal to Nigerians, particularly our media economic analysts. We confess that the problem we face today is of global dimension, and Nigeria is not alone. The global economy is today challenged, so Nigerian economy is not alone challenged. Although the 2016-2017 recession was challenging for the authorities, Nigeria exited that recession in just after 5 quarters. Notwithstanding the challenges posed by the current crisis, we are very optimistic that Nigeria will surmount this challenge. And indeed, recovery is in sight.
Welcome back. Oh, Professor Kpakol, you just listened to the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria speaking about Nigeria's recovery. Yes, the NDU talked about, Nigeria not being the only nation affected by this economic downturn. But, the part where it's quite tricky for Nigeria is the fact that the World Bank says that compared to other countries, Nigeria will be ×2 affected by the effect of COVID-19, dwindling oil prices, and the rest. And just before we went on that break, you've talked about some recommendations, but for the World Bank, it talked about some policy options, really, in some areas, 5 areas it says, and one of them is safeguarding and mobilizing revenues, as well as reprioritizing public spending. This whole challenge is pretty much about money, but the World Bank is focusing on how we use the money we actually get. Yes, we don't get enough as the government would love to, but how we manage it is quite important. So how do you see us handling this, especially in terms of government spending, the cost of governance, which a lot of people have spoken about in recent times?
Well, that's an issue that we are all very familiar with. It's the issue of governance, the issue of allocative efficiency, that we've got to be, we're using nice terms here, got to be efficient in the way we allocate our resources. Some people say that we have to be sure that we defeat corruption. That's what really we're talking about here. And I think that that's not something that would just fly away overnight. I think that the government is doing its bit, pursuing that, and they have to continue doing it. But I think if we want to take it to a higher level, then we need to begin to teach these kinds of things in our schools, starting in our elementary schools, to let people understand the damage that is caused by corruption and by mismanagement of resources. That's a serious, what I call economic violence that is committed when resources are not used properly. So imagine resources that should go for health facilities not being used for health and people die. That's a violence that is committed against them. I think that is very clear. And I think that that's a political issue to a very large extent that I think our governments, federal, state, and local, should be very serious in looking at, especially the National Assembly should be serious looking at it, and I believe that they are doing that. But as far as the economics of it is concerned, I think that there are some things we can digitize a lot of our procedures a lot better. So that we minimize, we reduce the loopholes that may exist. So that's what I would say about that. Now, I think that the other things that I just want to talk about, for example, with our currency, that when you look at the gap between the parallel market rate and the official rate, you see it is pretty large. So that gap, I think, is being operated by a couple of factors. One is speculation. There are people that are very speculative there, and I think they're speculative because they don't see much happening in the area of production, and that's because production has been hinged perilously on crude oil, on the price of crude oil. And that's in serious danger going forward. I suppose that's something also that the World Bank is probably concerned about. We see a Biden administration coming in. They've appointed a John Kerry as their climate change czar, and giving him really a cabinet level type of position, and that's pretty serious. That shows me that the president of the biggest economy, the strongest power in the world, is concerned about climate change and is going to be taking steps against fossil fuel issues, against carbon dioxide emissions, and we rely pretty much on that. So that means we have to be very strategic right away if we want to be successful long term, to find a way that we pivot away from too much reliance on fossil fuels to other kinds of energy sources like wind and solar and turbine and things like that. So I hope that our authorities, I'm pretty sure that we have competent hands that are looking at that issue, because that's going to be extremely, extremely serious. The over-dependence on crude oil's revenue is just mind-blowing. And it's amazing that we've not solved that problem up till now. We have to solve it. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult. The reason I think that World Bank emphasized that we will suffer more than perhaps other countries is because we were already in trouble before COVID hit. So we were in we had the 2016 recession, and the economy came out of recession, as the governor of the central bank said, but very tepidly is the problem. You know, we never came strong out of the recession, and then now there's another recession that may cause this year's decline to be perhaps upwards of 4%, as some people are projecting, and that's pretty serious. So and how do you get out of it? I think that you get out of it doing the kind of things that I was talking about. You know, all hands must be on deck. This is not theoretical. This is something serious. I think we got to get at the state level. Since the state governors control the processes of the local government, I think they should do it immediately. They should do it today. They should call the local governments together, and the chiefs and the elders, and say, what can we produce that we can sell to the people of the world at very high quality? And we may need collaboration here.
That's quite interesting.
With the federal government. We need collaboration with people outside.
Pardon me, Tibotin. That's quite interesting.
I think this is really what the solution is
right.
To produce goods and services that we can export.
And I would like to explore that just as we wind down on this, because that's actually where you began from. You try to give a very simple definition of GDP, basically saying that, well, we're not producing goods and services that people want, but domestically and out there. So what are those goods and services that people want? Because clearly I imagine a lot of Nigerians thinking, so how do we go around this? So do you have an example, really? Or is there a list of those goods and services that people want? Or we're not just adding as much value to what we have already?
Both. You're correct. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's both issues. First, you got to produce the good, and then you add value to it. And that, what is value? Value, I often tell people, when people say, well, we want to create economic value, it means we want to create goods that provide benefits to the people. That's what value means. So if you can make people happy by giving them the things that provide benefits, then you have created value. So when we say value addition, we're trying to say we want to increase the benefits that you get from the goods and services that you buy. And those goods are simple. They're not difficult. There's nothing esoteric about this. We're just talking groundnuts. We're talking cashew nuts. We're talking palm oil. We're talking palm kernel oil. We're talking shea butter. Yam, cassava. Those are the kind of things that we have. We're not talking about something that you go to Mars to go and get. You get those kinds of things. And then we also have to be a little bit more innovative in processing them. But let's get them out first at a high level of quality, so the people of the world will also want it. But I think that we should look for partners outside. There are a lot of people who are looking for this.
Let's stay on that for just one moment, Prof.
We have the...
Prof. Just one moment. Let's stay on that, those products that you mentioned. It's interesting that top on your list is groundnuts, because many will remember the groundnut pyramids. I'm sure you do as well in the First Republic, you know, the groundnut pyramids, and so many other people believe that that's one of the main things, even as at now, that will still export. But something critical in getting that production underway is something you mentioned earlier, which is about capacity development. In what areas are we lacking, and what should we do to scale it up as quickly as possible?
Thank you very much. I am glad you asked this question, because that's really what my big thing is. So my big thing nowadays is human capital development. And that's that because I think that the centrality of it and the criticality of it is enormous. We have to invest in our people at work. It's in the offices, it's in the workplaces, it's on the farms that people produce goods and services. And the reason you invest in human capital, because by definition, I say human capital is a stock of knowledge and of their wellness, of the people's wellness and the behavior that they put together in order to produce goods and services at a high rate of productivity. So basically, we want to train people. If you look at the successful countries of the world, they are doing a lot of training. So you need to give your people a lot of training, whether they be on the farm or in the government office or in the private office. You give them a lot of training. You appreciate them. You make sure that they have the wellness programs are taken care of, and you coach them on behavior, emotional intelligence, being able to cope with circumstances. Even now, this is difficult times. Who is talking to the people as the people cry out there looking for help, wondering what to do? You need to have a way of engaging them. A developing country cannot behave like an advanced economy. In a developing country, I argue that the government has a very strong role in working with the people, in counseling them, in holding their hands as best as possible, in encouraging them, motivating them, and providing. When you say enabling environment, it's not just about providing electricity. It's also about talking to them, explaining things to them, connecting them with markets outside to say, hey, this is where you can sell the things that you produce. So human capital development is extremely pivotal in all of this. In fact, it is central. It is the number one thing, numero uno. If there's one thing that we want to take away, is that we need to invest in our people to understand how to be competitive globally. That is the thing. The fact of the matter is that coming out of COVID, I think many other countries are going to be stronger because they've taken this time to do research and development, to examine the circumstances and try to see how the nature of the competition is. And I'm hoping that we are also doing so, because the competition is going to be stiffer after this. Everybody's going to want to come out there and be competitive. Are we coming out to be competitive? To do so, you got to have your people ready, and that's where human capital development comes in. And this has to happen across board. Literacy programs to older people, tax-specific literacy programs, tax-specific skills training. We got to convert knowledge into skills. So, I mean, you just don't know stuff because you went to the university. Come out of the university, how do you convert that knowledge into skills?
Right, Prof. I think this got tricky when we asked you your favorite question as the last question. I know it's going to take a while for you to respond, but we'd like to thank you so much, Professor Magnus Kpakol, Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this all-important topic.